Welcome to a bonus episode of the Emerging Civil War podcast. I'm Chris Mackowski, and joining me from his headquarters out west is none other than my good friend Curt Fields, aka Ulysses S Grant. How you doing, Curt?
I am wonderful. I feel victorious today. Spring is breaking. The trees are becoming green and red and budding. It's a beautiful sunny day here in the Western Theater. And give us a few more days and the artillery and the wagons can roll. The ground will be firm enough. So I feel victorious.
I like that positive attitude at the beginning of campaign season.
Indeed.
And you recently spent some time up at Fort Donaldson for their anniversary. And, I always think about how miserable the weather was up there at the time.
And I was able to make a point. Of course, I was there at Smith's Charge, Tour Stop 5, I think, where Buckner actually was the resistance that Charles Ferguson Smith. And I have to say, no one ever says, or people rarely say, General C.F. Smith. If you do, no one knows who you're talking about. But Charles Ferguson Smith, whenever anybody says anything, they always say Charles Ferguson Smith. And I like to chide people when I'm doing talks as Grant and say, makes you want to stand up straight and say Charles Ferguson Smith, because he was that kind of man. But we were there at our Tour Stop 5, and I had the wonderful Greg Biggs, military historian. I had the distinct pleasure of listening to Greg talk about Smith's charge and Buckner's resistance and so forth. It was really the last act in the battle on the 15th before Pillow and Floyd skedaddled. And I'd like to say, too, in the video, I'm going to take a picture of Gideon Pillow's tombstone. Mm-hmm. It's in Elmwood Cemetery in Memphis, and his grandson put it up. And to read it, you'd think he should have been the president. But I want to take a picture of that and send it to Emerging Civil War so it may be shared, speaking of Fort Pillow. But we had a wonderful 161st celebration. Ken Gott, author who wrote Where the South Lost the Civil War, Brian Steele Wills was there. Greg Biggs was there. A couple of other fellows whose name escapes me. I do not mean to slight them, but they had 4 authors there. Had a really good show in the Stewart County, which is where the fort's located, in Tennessee, near Clarksville, Tennessee, upper northwest corner of the state, or center northwest. Wonderful event put on. And I'd like to encourage everyone, if you haven't been to Fort Donaldson, you should go. It's one of the latter ones. It was, I think, 1935 when it was made a national battlefield. And I asked Brian McCutcheon, the superintendent there several years ago, why do we have a national battlefield as opposed to a national military park? And Brian said, it's just when it was made a park, that was the nomenclature. So Fort Donaldson is a relatively small battlefield, and it's fascinating. The guns, some of the guns at the 2 water batteries, and I saw a video that you had done there. I did another one as Brigadier General Grant that I've got on my YouTube channel, talking about the water batteries, and a couple of those guns are the actual guns that are there at the water batteries. There's only one monument in the park, and it's to the Confederate soldier. Beautiful Confederate soldier monument, which is an irony there because there are no other monuments. There are a number of cannon. In fact, near Smith's Charge, there's a cannon there that was used only one time in the war there. And it's particular. And I'm speaking in vagaries. I'll look it up and send you the information. Ken Gott was telling me that it's a particular type of gun that was used only at Fort Donaldson and not anywhere else. So there are many things of note there. And if you're in Nashville, Tennessee, you're only about an hour away from Fort Donaldson. So I would urge everybody, when you have an opportunity, please go see Fort Donaldson, because yes, I have a bias. We all do, but I have a bias about Donaldson in portraying Grant. I think now there are several. You and I have talked about pivot points, let's call them, in the war, and everybody's got legitimate and strong contentions. I don't say arguments, because they're not. Contentions that this movement or this moment, this place, that spot, that event is the turning point. Well, there's not any the turning point, but there are several that are of great moment that were significant turning points. And that Fort Donaldson was one such moment. After that, if one looks at the war, once Donaldson fell, the dominoes started falling all the way up from Fort Donaldson at the Dover Hotel to the McLean House in Appomattox. They didn't stop falling until the parlor at the McLean House, and it all goes back to Donaldson. So, and then that's just the logistical, the emotional moment of Grant on Dudley Hill there, when he told McClernand and Lew Wallace, gentlemen, that ground must be retaken, and put the spurs to his horse. He was riding Jack, a roan, cream-colored roan. I rediscovered that reading about it to prepare to go up there. But he put the spurs to Jack and rode away. Now, if he'd said dig in, if he'd said, as most men at that time would have said, retreat, he would have disappeared from history. And then you get into would the Union have lost the war or not? But Donaldson was significant in many ways. And I think it's one of the most significant moments in the war.
Now, and you talked about those moments of contingency and the dominoes. Since you have your copy of Grant at 200 conveniently posed over your shoulder there,
I do have it. I do have Grant at 200 there.
So the essay I contributed there, one of the essays I contributed, was about those moments of contingency that lead to the rise of Grant. And you've got a wonderful essay in there too about what it's like to be Ulysses S. Grant and the insights that's given you into the character. So we'll put in a little plug for the book there.
You're very kind. You were very kind to reach out to me and ask me to be a contributor. I still haven't gotten over that shock. And then to see my essay in the book, and then to have you be praising of it is, thank you very much.
See, but as viewers may not know, there's a huge mutual admiration society between Curt and I, because he says something kind of like that, and I'm like, I can't believe I get to talk to Curt Fields. So it goes.
But let me make a segue, like Grant would have done. President Lincoln was asked by, I think, Hay, one of his secretaries, but someone had come in his office and asked Lincoln, what do you like about Grant? And he said several things, but one of them that he said that, of course, it's legendary and he's reputed to have said it. I think he did say this in my professional quasi-historian role. I think Lincoln did say it. He said, and Lincoln can't kind of high voice. I've seen a couple of Lincoln living historians who do that very well. And he had that Kentucky accent, but he said Grant disappears down a rabbit hole, and then he pops up somewhere over there. And you don't know where he's going to pop up, and you don't know when, but he does. And I like to think of that about Lincoln. But about Fort Donaldson, my Grant segue, I've got another Fort Donaldson connection about which our business is today.
Yes, I thought that was actually pretty fortuitous that we start talking about Donaldson, because that's sort of what got me thinking about what I imagine must be an interesting challenge for you. And that is, Grant was a notorious cigar smoker. I've essentially written a book about Grant as a cigar smoker and the downsides of that. And
I'm familiar with that. Yes.
And as a living historian who portrays Grant, that's got to be something you have to deal with. And of course, Grant and the cigar relationship were born at Fort Donaldson. So tell me a little bit about, like, how do you as a living historian deal with cigars?
I would like to begin that discussion with the point that Grant tried smoking at West Point, and it was forbidden. Of course, forbidding it made them all smoke. And they were all experimenting with tobacco. And you have to remember that then, as now, West Point is, well, at that time, it was about 250 cadets when Grant entered in the spring of 39. Now it's 4,000. They have about 1,000 per class. But he got there at 39 and he tried to smoke, didn't like it. He did two things in Mexico. He grew a beard, which he cites himself as it being bright red, and which is, I think, of note for people anyone watching this has an interest in history, and little thing, pivot wheels like that history turns on. Grant had a bright red beard in the Mexican War when he's in his early mid-20s. He picked up smoking at that time, and I've seen at least one reference where he liked El Sol cigars. He also picked up speaking Spanish. He can speak Spanish very well. But he began his tobacco habit then, and he was a pipe smoker. He much preferred his pipe. And John Brenton describes him at Cairo, Illinois in late 61, when he had assumed command of the Southeastern District of Missouri, his first general command, that he came in to see Grant as the chief surgeon there. And Grant was in the upstairs office in the back at a desk smoking his Curt Warden pipe with about a 10-inch stem, very happily enjoying it. So Grant was a pipe smoker, much preferred pipes. Grant had a terrific tobacco habit. He chewed tobacco a great deal. That's not lifted up so much, but he chewed tobacco, dipped tobacco, and smoked tobacco, and was a pipe smoker until Donaldson. A reference to Donaldson. The night of the 15th, about the night of the 14th going into the 15th, about 3 o'clock in the morning, Flag Officer Foote sent word for Grant to come visit him. He said, and apologized. He said, I would come to you. Now, he was about 7 miles away from Grant, where Grant's headquarters was at the widow Crisp's house. She really wasn't a widow. Her old man walked off and left her the year before the battle took place, and he never came back. So people in the area, just out of respect, called her the widow, because her old man never came back. But that was about 3 miles from where the Union Works, the left of the Union Works facing the fort near the water batteries. And Foote was a little further north. Well, Grant gets there and they meet. Now, there are two things about Flag Officer Foote. The more you know, the better it gets. Foote was a profound teetotaler, absolutely anti-drink, prohibitionist. And he was also a minister. He preached every Sunday. And everybody on the boat came to services, and I like to kid him, in the Grant character. Grant liked to tease him. It's so easy to slip into character. Grant liked to tease him and say, you're the only preacher I know that's got 100% attendance every Sunday, because everybody was expected to be at services. Of course, nobody worked at that time, so everybody liked time off. And he preached, and he stopped the grog ration in the United States Navy, because they got grog twice a day, which is, as I understand, it's about an ale. It's an alcoholic drink. They got a few ounces morning and afternoon. Well, Foote stopped that on his boats, the Mississippi Squadron, and then it spread throughout the Navy. Now, he didn't drink, but he did smoke cigars. And he was quite the cigar smoker. And when Grant arrived, he offered preferred Grant a cigar, which Grant took and smoked. When Grant leaves, he gets the word the morning of the 15th, the breakout attempt, and so forth. And at the end of the day, Grant, and that's become such a trite expression now, but at the end of the day, in this case, literally, Grant said some journalist saw him and he still had his cigar. It had long since gone out, and had written something about the great Victor Grant smokes a cigar. And that's when, I've seen different numbers, Chris. I've seen anywhere from 4,000 to 12,000 boxes of cigars. And I would like to point out, too, that the Civil War was the reason we have cigar boxes, because the government needed a way to tax the tobacco, the cigars. So they began requiring they be put in boxes. Until then, you just bought them in bundles. So cigar boxes are a result of the Civil War. But Grant got thousands of boxes of cigars. And his attitude was, obviously, well, if you can't, you don't get anything else, go ahead and smoke that. And they started out dispersing them to everybody in the area, and the area widened until everybody in the Federal Army, I guess, that smoked was smoking a cigar that Grant had been sent. So after that, as a result of what he got at Fort Donaldson from what a newspaper reporter, no, that's the 21st century, a journalist had in his day had made the comment, the great Victor Grant smokes a cigar, he began his lifelong habit of cigars. Now, I'd like to clarify something. Everybody says, and virtually everybody, when I make an appearance as General or President Grant, there are two questions that I always get at any appearance. I always, without fail, I have never put on the uniform that somebody didn't make a remark or a crack about Grant's drinking. And it's hard to say ever, never, and always, but I can say I have never put on the uniform, and I'm beginning my 14th year of portraying General and President Grant. I have never put on the uniform or the presidential suit that I have not had a comment or a question, or too frequently a jab about Grant's drinking. Wow. And that's another video that I'd like to do. But the smoking, most people think that Grant smoked 20 to 25 cigars a day. He didn't. Grant's habit of smoking cigars it's more of an oral gratification. He'd fire up a cigar and smoke a bit, and then it'd go out, and he'd just chew on it. And then somebody would point out, you need to light your cigar again, General. Oh, yeah. And he'd light it up, get a lucifer and light it up again. So he would do that. His problem, though, as you did so well in your book about his last battle, it's the exposure of the tobacco, and I'm going to get into that when I talk about what I do. The exposure, that constant tobacco in the mouth, contributed. Now, remember, he dipped and chewed, but the tobacco in the mouth, the exposure to the skin, contributed to the oral cancer, base of the tongue. But he would take a pocket full of cigars, but he would really only smoke, I'd say, 8 to 10 cigars a day. Now, my God, 8 to 10 cigars a day. I can't fathom doing anything like that. But he didn't smoke 20. That's another reference to a journalist there close to where you live in the wilderness. I think the end of the second day, he was brought a Confederate general whose name I don't recall right now, who was an old friend of Grant. And there's also an anecdote that Hancock came up that night, that Grant, he said, I had picked up 20 or so cigars and put them in my pocket at the beginning of the day. And at the end of the day, I preferred a cigar, reached in to get a cigar, and had none. So that was like 22, 23 cigars. And that's what everybody hangs their historical hat on, that Grant would smoke 20 cigars a day. He didn't smoke 20 cigars a day. He smoked too many for too long.
That always reminds me of, the Stonewall Jackson and the lemon myth. There are two instances where people supposedly saw him with lemons in the war, and then suddenly that turns into Stonewall Jackson loved lemons more than anything else. And in the same way with Grant and his cigars, where we've got one account that uses the number 20, and suddenly that becomes the number. And it's interesting the way people extrapolate those sorts of things just because they want to create these sorts of images or myths.
They don't go away. They're historical viruses in the body of history. There's no way to cure them, and they're there forever. So, but now I'm also asked, do you smoke those cigars? And the reply is no, except now you can't always say ever, never, always. I can't say I never smoked them. I have found several things that would be the purpose of this video. First of all, Grant is, if I didn't have the cigar, or any man who portrays Grant, if you don't have the cigar, you can have the uniform and the beard. But if you don't have the cigar, you're just another federal officer with a uniform and a beard. Many of them had beards. But the cigar is the trademark. Now,
one thing I'll add to that, though, is I've also seen fellows who have portrayed Grant who don't match his body type, the way you are so exact about it. But you give him a cigar and suddenly he's Grant, even though he might not otherwise match up. The cigar really is this kind of the signature thing.
Indeed. I had a fellow ask me at one of the to give some frames of what you just said. There's a counterpart, Grant in a cigar, and a man with white hair and a beard doing lead. I'm fortunate enough to work with Thomas Jesse, who is unquestionably the best lead in the country, and we do it. He has the demeanor and the personality of General Lee himself, and it's not a contrivance. That's Tom Jesse. But the Park Service and I are both so fortunate that Tom and I were able to come together, and we do Grant every year, Grant and Lee at the Appomattox every year. But I had somebody at Appomattox ask me after I had Tom Jesse went off someplace, and we were taking pictures and doing what we do. And one of the guys said, "Why is it that in the South, every man who has white hair and can grow a beard wants to do Robert E. Lee?" And because they admire Lee, and you get the white hair and the beard, but not everybody matches that body style. And that's something that when I do talks about, and I've done a few about living historians, who you portray. And the number one rule is pick somebody, if you're going to do someone who's well known, and everybody sees the photographs and so forth, you need to pretty much resemble that individual. I'm 5'8". I couldn't do Lincoln, and would never try to do Lincoln. It just wouldn't work. And the same thing goes with, if you're going to pick somebody of note, you should physically resemble that person. But the cigar issue, you've got to have more than the body and the beard. You got to have the cigar early on. Now, do I smoke them? No, I'm a non-smoker. The rare exception being when somebody will have the drinks and the cigar and they want to have the conviviality. I'm okay with that. In fact, I enjoy it at the time. Now, when I smoke a cigar, I've got a taste in my mouth for 3 days that it takes a blowtorch to get it out. So I really enjoy the conviviality and the sitting around with the fellas and the ladies too, if they're there, and we all have a good time and a good cigar. If you got a good cigar, which leads me to getting the cigars. When I first started out doing Grant 13 years ago, I had the cigar. Well, I had a great big cigar because I thought that's what you should do. I'm not a smoker. I don't know anything about cigars. So one of the earliest photos of me at Grant at Fort Donaldson, I made my first appearance at Grant at Fort Donaldson in February of 2010. And I've got a cigar that's about a foot long because I thought that was what I should do. Now, it looks like a baseball bat in my mouth. And I've seen, and yes, I can laugh at myself, but I was growing in the portrayal. I've seen a few other fellows that do Grant that have the big cigars. Maybe it works for them, but it didn't for me. Then I realized I needed a smaller cigar, and I went to other cigars. Found out two things, Chris, and I want viewers to understand. If you do Grant, and there's several folks that do, I know several of them, good guys. If you do anybody in the 19th century of the Civil War who smokes a cigar, buy a quality cigar. Don't go to a drugstore and get the cheap crap on the shelf back there. Go to a tobacconist. Go get a good cigar, because the cheap cigars, the inexpensive cigars, the glue on the wrapper it will burn your lip, and your lip will stick to it. And when you take the cigar out of your mouth, it takes some skin off your lip with it. So if you get a quality cigar, you don't have that problem. So if one is going to smoke a cigar in their impression, they need to get a quality cigar.
I would also think that, when you smoke a good cigar, like, that's a time commitment. You spend a lot of time with that cigar, and you would want something good rather than something that is cheap, because you're with it for an hour and a half.
Yes. So buy a quality cigar. Now, what's quality? The cigars that I use, I bought some before, two of them before I went to Donaldson a couple of weeks ago, and they cost $8.50 a piece. They've gone up. They were $6 when I started buying them, but they were $8.50. But they last me a long time. Now, I can't imagine a cigar smoker who spends $8.50 every time he has or she has a smoke. But get a quality cigar. You've always got it in your hand. It don't burn your lips. Cheap cigars burn your lips, blister your lips. Get a good cigar. Now, the next step that I experienced in the growth of using a cigar is I didn't light them. And I got some ribbing on my Facebook page, Curt Fields, as General Ulysses S Grant. I got some ribbing both on Facebook and in person. General, don't you ever light those stogies? And I took that to heart. Listen to your criticisms, oblique or however they may be, or commentary. So I thought, okay, well, I'd light them up, fire them up, and get the taste in my mouth beyond just having an unlit cigar in my mouth. And that I didn't care for that, but I have found that if you're not a smoker, as I am not, but you have to have a cigar as part of your personality that you portray, you can take a cigar and just burn it. Just take the lighter and burn it. Now, it takes a couple of minutes, but burn it. The tobacco will take hold, and maybe you get a draw off of it, but the tobacco will take hold. You don't have to drag on it, and it'll burn. All you want in your portrayal is a burnt cigar, a singed cigar, but burn it well so it's the whole surface. So it looks like you've been smoking. It's all illusion. But you can burn a cigar without having to smoke it. And I do that. So most of the time when you see me with a cigar and it looks like I've been smoking it, I probably haven't actually been smoking the cigar. I merely burned it. Now, there's an exception. I found out this is, first of all, get a quality cigar. 2, you don't have to smoke it. You can burn the end of it. and you'll learn how much is enough for what you do. Number 3, I found out in doing the films, I have been so blessed. I've done the film they show at Appomattox in the Visitor Center, and I've done the film they show at Dover Hotel at Fort Donaldson, and then I think they're showing it now, the film at the Grant Memorial in New York City, where I play President Grant. So fortunate to do that. But I have found in photographs and in the films, I first picked up in a film, the smoke from a cigar really makes a great image. The smoke of the wreath of the cigar, there are some pictures of me, particularly at Fort Donaldson, with the smoke billowing out of my nostrils and my mouth. And it makes a very dramatic, it's not because it's me, I'm not the issue. The smoke coming from the cigar makes a dramatic and impacting image in a photograph. Mm-hmm. Now, that's the exception that I've got. People will ask me if they're taking pictures, will you light the cigar for the pictures? Yes, I will do that. It's a small enough matter to have the bad taste for a couple of days for folks who are visiting a battlefield or an event to get a good picture to take home, because, see, that's what they take home. That's what keeps them coming back to other historical events. But the smoke from the cigar or the pipe makes a very dramatic photograph. So I will light them up to take pictures. And I did a video a couple of weeks ago now at Donaldson, where I'm at the water batteries as Brigadier General Grant. And it's about a 5-minute, 6-minute video, but it opens with me looking, I'm back to the camera looking at the water batteries up the Cumberland River. And the smoke, I took a big mouthful of smoke, and it drifts and wafts away in the wind. Makes a great image. And then I turn around and begin speaking, and the cigar is a dead issue, actually, and thought never pick it up again. So the smoke makes a good image. Get a quality cigar, and you don't have to smoke it, burn the end of it. Cigar smoke makes a great image in a photograph or in the film. Now, I'm always asked, well, General, what do you smoke? If I had a drum, I'd roll it.
Yeah. I
smoke Oliva. Now, my particular brand that I have used, is an Oliva, O-L-I-V-A, Oliva 50 ring. Now, I don't know anything about cigars, but 50 ring is how big the cigar is around. So it's a 50 ring cigar. This is a Churchill length. Now, I smoke use other brands of cigars, so you don't have, Oliva is not the only one, but Oliva makes a good one. Churchill length, 50 ring, because I found out, now here's another cigar that I use, and this one is not so big. Let's see, let's put them side by side, get a good contrast here. Maybe I can do them like this for the viewer. All right, now there's a difference between the cigars. This is your standard size cigar, and this is a Churchill length. This cigar is fine. It makes a good photograph. Now, you're all about the photographs. Remember, that's what people take home. It's also, for Grant, a strong part of your image. So this is a good cigar. Again, it's a 50 ring. So you've got to get a cigar that's big enough to make a good photograph. I tried the small cigars, smaller than this. They don't show up well in photos. So I evolved to this size, your standard size cigar, and a 50 ring. Remember, the 50 ring is how big around it is. That's important. The length is important too, because when you smoke this or it burns down and it gets to be a couple of inches long, the pictures are not quite so dramatic. That's when I went to the Churchill length, because I can burn it down or smoke a bit of it, and it still has an impressive length. And it's not like a baseball bat in my mouth. It's not so big that it's hard to hold in my mouth. So the 50 ring, get that 50 ring in width, and the Churchill length makes the better photograph for me, my preference. So that would be the fourth. Get a quality cigar. You don't have to smoke it. You can burn it. You can light it for dramatic photographs or make the photographs or films more dramatic, any videos you do, and get a cigar that shows up in the pictures. A small cigar won't show up. Now, it's all illusion. I'll make a modern day reference. The movie that Arnold Schwarzenegger did, Red Heat, years ago, the pistol that he carries in that film is half again bigger than that model pistol is in actuality. Because Schwarzenegger's hand is so big that they had to have a bigger pistol for it to show up well in the film. So what he's carrying, obviously it's not a real weapon, we know that, but what he's carrying is half again bigger than the actual Russian pistol that he's supposed to be carrying, because it's all illusion. They had to have a gun that showed up. Same thing with a Churchill length as opposed to your regular length. So those are the 4 points I would make.
One of the things I'm thinking about here, it reminds me of food, where it's not just how it tastes, but how does it look and how does it smell? And those are kind of other components of a really nice meal. And I think about that with your portrayal and, the taste, it's your actual presentation. And how does it look? Do you have the uniform? Do you have the cigar? And then there's that smell. And that's a kind of component that the cigar literally adds to that people find immediately recognizable, and it draws them into the experience of listening to General Grant because of the evocativeness that smell can bring.
And a quality cigar smells better.
Oh yeah, for sure.
You get some that smell like a day in the barnyard and taste that way too. Just get a quality cigar, whether you do Grant or whether you any historical, because smoking, everybody virtually in the 19th century, in fact, well into the 20th century, everybody smoked. It's just what you did. And so many portrayals require a cigar. Sherman, if you do Sherman, a cigar for him. Everybody virtually in the military or civilians would have a cigar. So get a good one. Be kind to yourself. Your lips will appreciate it, because you get a cheap cigar and pull that thing off your lip and patches of your bottom lip blister up. Don't do it.
Well, and I have to admit too, I come from a school of historians, and this comes back to the very early days of emerging Civil War, where we believe that the best history happens over beer and cigars. So,
well, and that's why I said what I did. One of the reasons, because I'd like to sit around the campfire with you and have a cigar and a cup of coffee and pass the time of day.
We'll make that happen, my friend. So, Curt, thanks so much for spending a little time and giving us some behind the scenes of your wonderful portrayal of General Grant and how you deal with cigars.
Thank you. It's always a joy to be on the Emerging Civil War and contribute to what that organization is doing. It's the best.
We're delighted to have you. Thanks so much, Curt. I'm Chris Mackowski. Everyone, thanks for being with us here on the Emerging Civil War podcast. We'll see you online and on the battlefield.